This is exciting and fun for me. This is my first ever relative that I've hosted as part of the Zillow speaker series. So Joel and I are cousins. How many of you have visited Stack Exchange? Okay. So, sorry, Stack Overflow. Use Stack Exchange, visit Stack Overflow. So then you really need no introduction, but I will try to do one anyway. So FogBugs, which is one of the leading bug tracking tools. How many of you have used FogBugs, either here or elsewhere? A lot, okay. Stack runs a massive network of user-generated content and community information. And how many of you have used Trello so far? Tried it? Okay, a couple. All right. So in his spare time, Joel and his company have also rolled out this new company, Trello, which is for project management. So without further ado, let me turn it over to Joel Spolsky.
Okay. Just so I know who you are, how many people here are developers in some way, shape, or form? A lot of you. Any designers? Designers? A couple. Anthropologists? Really? Okay. This is the cultural anthropology of Stack Exchange. I took a class in college called cultural anthropology for sort of a distribution requirement. And it was all this Trobriand islanders exchanging blankets and yams and interesting rituals and rites. It was the most boring thing I had ever taken in college. And I was unable to, I would not have graduated if I didn't take this class because it was the last year and I couldn't drop it and I didn't have enough credits. So I forced myself to get an A in cultural anthropology. And utterly boring. And then I discovered 20 years later that this is really the stuff I learned in this class is the only thing I really use in my day job, having also taken a lot of useless computer science courses, which I enjoyed. So the Stack Exchange network right now gets about 250 million page views. That's a lot of page views. 25 million global monthly uniques visit. So that's the number of humans that we think visit the network every month. If it was a country, it would be the 47th largest, along with all of those amazing, great countries. Never mind, this is not a good slide. It's about the size of Texas. That's a much better slide. That's a lot of people, and when you study people, you're not studying computer science anymore. You're not studying ergonomics. The first people that went into user interface design were ergonomics specialists. But you're really studying culture because you're creating a tool, and you guys are too, actually, that allows people to talk to one another, to communicate with one another, and to create sort of society, right, online, mediated through your stuff and through our stuff. And the way you study human culture is what's called cultural anthropology. Don't know that picture. When we started when we started with computers, when I started, this is me. No, I'm pretty old. I think the joke is that I'm so old that my blood type has been discontinued. But I did actually start with punch cards. And you were kind of lucky if you got numerical results when you sort of created a bunch of punch cards, submitted them to the computer. If let's say you're using these mainframe computers to do payroll, and the payroll is every 2 weeks, if you could actually calculate payroll once in 2 weeks, you were thrilled. But at some point, interactive time sharing, what was called time sharing, was invented. This sort of idea that you would actually type at the computer and get an immediate response, not getting it later in a batch job. And this is actually what I learned to program on these deck writers, where you would type your little program in BASIC or Fortran, and it's a dot matrix printer, and it would immediately run it, through an interpreter. And this is what Unix and the C programming language were invented in. If you ever wondered why Unix has a command called creat instead of create, it's because these were really slow printers. And but you still couldn't use these really as a communications device because the actual speed of the printhead was 300 baud, about 30 characters per second, and you just could not print fast enough to read, and it would drive you crazy. And people literally, would encode things in various ways, but nobody even thought to use these to communicate until the first terminals came out. These were called smart terminals. They were smart because they had the ability to move the cursor. And this is the VT100 series, which was very, very popular. And because they didn't have to wait for that printhead, they could run at however fast you could make a modem, get down to the data center downstairs, and that could be like 1,200 baud or 2,400 baud, and that was pretty fast. And you could actually start to deliver large blobs of text for the first time using computers, and that's when email was invented, and we still have it. And everything is still based on email, and everything is still modeled on email. The very first conversation systems networks where people asked questions and got answers were online forums. A classic early example was USENET. And these were based off of actually email, because we started out with email, and then they made mailing lists, and then they created this system for managing essentially mailing lists that you were subscribed to. And one thing I noticed about USENET, so USENET, how many of you used USENET back in the day? A lot of you. So just to fill everybody else in, USENET was started out primarily in academia, and there were news groups on every possible subject. There was comp.sys.ibm.pc, there was comp.sys.amiga, there was everything. It really had everything. And then it had a bunch of food news groups and stuff like that as well, but mostly it was computer stuff. And people would mostly go and ask questions about how to solve problems and get answers, and sometimes they would discuss the politics of the Middle East, and create flame wars and burn things to the ground. But the basic idea, the format here, for those of you that have ever looked at a raw email message, the format was exactly the same as an email message. This is just email in a different form. One of the things that I noticed early on is that the culture of USENET, I know it's kind of hard to read, but I'll tell you what's going on here. The culture of USENET that developed was actually an accidental artifact of the software. In other words, the way that the software was created to run USENET accidentally created a culture purely by accident. I'll give you just one example, although there are many. In the USENET system, nobody had very big hard drives. And so the average participant, there was no central server for USENET. Everybody it was a store and forward system, and it was basically like distributed version control, where every single USENET node would connect to some other USENET node, and they'd sort of swap files that they didn't each have. And so everybody had a complete copy of everything. Every campus, let's say the University of Pennsylvania, had a copy of everything. And there was a lot of conversation happening on USENET, so they didn't have the disk drive space for all this. So they'd only keep 3 or 4 days worth of historical stuff. There was no central location that had a complete archive of USENET. Actually, years later, a company called Deja News went and collected it by finding old tapes, old backup tapes. But there was no central place to store this stuff. It was forwarded to everybody, and they threw it away after 3 days. That meant that if person A, if Joe writes a post on USENET and posts it for everybody else to read, and you want to respond to it, you can't be sure that the people reading your response will have seen the original post. And so to solve this problem, the reply command in USENET would automatically quote the entire original message and put these little greater than signs at the front of every single line, so that you could sort of respond to the previous message and know that all the bystanders could see what you were responding to, so it would still allegedly make sense. So you're responding to a message on the politics of the Middle East, and you've been thrown into your editor, something very modern like Emacs, and everything has a little greater than sign in front of it. And then you go and you edit. And what people would do is they would go, as you could see somebody's done here, and intersperse your responses in the midst of, sort of alternating, in the midst of the previous person's argument. And you would say, clearly this is nonsensical, this is clearly nonsense, this is nonsense, et cetera, et cetera. That's usually what you did, is you took each sentence and you said that's stupid because of this, and that's stupid because of that. You usually weren't making a coherent argument. You were doing what the bloggers later reinvented this, and they called it fisking. That's just because this fellow named Fisk used to do it. But it started on USENET, and it's like take a single sentence and pick it apart, and then take another sentence and pick it apart. And it forms a particular culture of argumentativeness at the nitpicky level that is entirely an artifact of the accidental way that the software happens to work. And interestingly enough, when sort of the world expanded, that stuff never got any better. And I noticed that there's sort of a parallel to architecture, which is a lot of times you create a physical space, and then people use that physical space, sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally. Like you may have created it for this purpose, but the physical space that the architect has created defines how people use it, right? So they put these little things there, and people go and line up. Or you have like a little curve, and some kid will come and ride their skateboard on it. Or if you happen to build something that looks like a table and it has an 8x8 grid and 2 things that are shaped like human chairs, then old men will come and play chess. That one's a little bit more intentional. Sometimes it's completely accidental. So at the Spanish Steps in Rome, It's accidental because you have two roads that are at different levels, and it would be too steep to have a road between them, so they built steps. But those steps are awesome for people watching, and there's a fountain down there. So people sit on the steps, mostly backpackers, Roman high school kids, and gypsies, and watch each other and do each other's hair, because that's kind of what the steps define for them. And so if you want something awesome like the Spanish Steps, like they did in New York, you can build this artificial staircase that goes nowhere in the middle of Times Square, and hopefully you'll get some backpackers and Roman high school students, well, not so many, in New York City. So that's this idea that the architects at least are trying, I think, usually to think about how will the physical nature of the space we create cause people to use it. But these guys weren't. This is a typical online forum. And these forums that, when we first moved to the web from the world of USENET and listservs and mailing lists, they pretty much copied the data structures of USENET, the idea of threaded conversations and replies and so forth. Although it's now client-server and it's web-based and it's HTML and so forth, all of the bad artifacty crap that we accidentally did because we had no choice was actually retained in most of these systems. And my favorite example is that even though most of the thread starters on these traditional discussion forums, like PHPBB and vBulletin are two of the common software packages, one thing they're copying from USENET is either threaded or sequential conversation. So you might have a question and then another question following up, and then, hey, I have that problem too. Oh, well, what do you think about this? Did you try this? No, that doesn't work. Did you try this? Well, that doesn't work. Page 4, you have to do X. Here's a link. That's the correct answer, but it's on page 4. So when you find one of these things on Google, one of these conversations taking place in a traditional forum, you're reading a snapshot of an old conversation. It's very hard to find the actual answer in there. You really have to try everything that you see in the thread and see what really works. And that's incredibly frustrating. That's what we tried to fix for Stack Overflow. And the reason they do it this way is just the accident of that's the way mailing lists did it in 1969. 1979, really. Okay, so we're trying to build a utopian system, I think. And we're I don't know why this is the picture of utopia. It seems to fit. We have this sort of utopian view of saying, let's build a better society. Let's actually build kind of a world. It's sort of a form of hubris. I think we're about 10% of the way there in terms of actually like figuring out how we can make this work better by for the first time, just paying attention to the cultural anthropology, how people use the architecture and the built environment that we give them. So I'm going to talk about some of the specific decisions that we made and some of the specific things we think about at Stack Overflow and later on Stack Exchange that are examples of how we've designed this to kind of create the culture that we want to create and get the results that we want to create. Does anybody know what this is a picture of? Occupy Wall Street, right? And there's all kinds of clues that you got from that. It doesn't say Occupy Wall Street anywhere. It does say Wall Street in a couple of places. But the first clue probably is this fellow with the brightly colored keffiyeh and the Zapata T-shirt and the hipster glasses and the 99% thing. And Wall Street is a Ponzi scheme, and they're shouting. And over here you have a person who loves the 99%. She has very expensive headphones, but I won't hold those against her. There's a kind of a whole bunch of every group that's doing something is accidentally, but probably not accidentally, transmitting a whole bunch of messages about who they are, what they are, and who they want to join them, and who they want to push away, who they don't want to join them. So every group in the real world is fairly successful at getting other people who believe in the same things and support the same things to go line up with them, and is hopefully pretty successful at getting people who don't like those things to either go away or throw tomatoes. So when we started Stack Overflow, Jeff Atwood, my co-founder, actually I didn't tell him to do this, but he went and looked at a whole bunch of other Q&A platforms that were out there, just to see what we were competing against, just for his general amusement. This is Yahoo Answers, and it was one of our big competition in the world of Q&A. I think you all probably know that Yahoo Answers is humorously bad. But let's figure out why. Let's look at some of these questions. And again, this is just a homepage. This is your first impression of Yahoo Answers. What do I use to clean out my coffee maker? Anyone up for a food, drink, true, false survey? That sounds fun. R&P, I think that's rock and pop. What are you listening to? What was the last thing you ate? I mean, yeah, technically that's a question. Can I die from carbon monoxide? No, go ahead. Just breathe it in. Yeah, just try it out. all the way down here at the bottom, which is not all of you can see, is the actual clue as to what's going on here. I keep forgetting to do my homework. Question mark. Exclamation point. Question mark, yes. That's the clue, that what actually happens on Yahoo Answers is that this is a hangout for latchkey kids. These are teenagers, mostly girls, after school in the afternoon. That's what's going on here, 100%. And that's why the questions are what they are, and that's why they're not very good and they're not very interesting to you. And the things that they're doing, what are you listening to? This is chat. This isn't questions and answers. This is chat. And the reason that the teenage girls are on here in the afternoon chatting is because when they go to MySpace or Facebook, they get stalked by weirdos who annoy them. Or their family is on, and it's weirdos on MySpace and their family on Facebook. I don't know which is worse. But when you're on Yahoo Answers, you're completely anonymous and you can create a new account for every single question that you post. So you don't have a permanent identity on Yahoo Answers. It's sort of like a chat room with no permanent identity, and that's what goes on. But the point is that if you came to this site and you were interested in, for example, asking a question about this new Japanese proof about prime numbers that just came out. There's a 5,000-page proof, some Japanese mathematician. And if you were a research-level mathematician and you were reading page 4,973, and there was something you didn't quite understand, I don't think you would ask it on this site. This would push you away. If you had a programming problem, you wouldn't ask it here, even though they have 50 million, billion, trillion questions on this site. Your question does not belong. Here's another one, answers.com, and this is the biggest one. This is like at some point, they were the 12th largest website on Quantcast in the world in terms of traffic. A huge, huge site. What kind of attorney is needed for advice on getting someone you know committed to a mental institution? I like that one. That's a real legit question. What are some examples of a welcome address for JS prom? Now, I've given this speech many times, and I always ask the audience, does anybody know what JS prom is? Junior, senior. You guys do know. This must be a Seattle person. Are you from Seattle? No. Is that a thing, junior, senior prom? California. Okay. I've asked this question in a lot of parts of the world, and they've never heard the words JS prom. Most people say JavaScript. There is, and well, that's sort of interesting, actually, is you sort of imagine that, so there's some high school kids here asking a specific question, and they don't even get that JS prom is sort of a regional thing. That's not sort of a universal thing that happens. Awesome. Okay, and you're also kind of the youngest people in the audience. I'm thinking you knew it this was. Once again, you're sort of pushing away the wrong people. You're attracting the right people. This is Askville by Amazon. How can I start making the right choices in my life? What is the 21st largest states? Oh, here's a math question. That's okay. Again, this is the only question on here that looks real, and the answer is this looks like homework. We don't give homework answers. So Stack Overflow, obviously, when you look at that website, the people that are asking about the JS prom will realize that they have landed in the wrong place. There is no reasonable prom questions here. There's nothing about food, drink questions. In fact, you know you're in the wrong place if you're not a programmer. If you are a programmer, you know that you're in the right place because you start seeing words, SQL, CakePHP, Android, .NET 3.5, that are meaningful to you. And you say, oh, wait a minute, this is my tribe. These are my people. I'm going to get a good answer to my .NET 3.5 question on here because look at all those people that are talking about the innards of .NET 3.5. Here's our site on Jewish life and learning. It's a very strictly Orthodox Jewish site. They ask questions that, again, it appears to be English. It's actually a dialect called Yeshiva English. Most of the important words are Hebrew or Yiddish. This is the only one that I can really explain and translate. Is it possible to have chametz on the Shabbos directly after Pesach? Translated, are you permitted to eat, or is it possible to have leavened bread on the Sabbath, which immediately follows Passover? Meaning, if Passover ends on Friday night, you can't, of course, bake bread on the Sabbath because you're not allowed to cook on the Sabbath. It took me a while, but I was able to explain to you one of the questions on this particular site. Again, if you are an Orthodox Jew and you're concerned about this stuff, you're going to say, this is awesome. I can ask questions and get answers and give answers and participate with people that care about this stuff. If you're not, you wouldn't even bother going in there to bug those people about why they don't believe in the New Testament, et cetera. Like, you're just not going to go to the site. And so the very act of our pushing away the people that don't belong on the site is one of the most important things that we do that almost no web designer likes to think about. They're always trying to think about, how can I make the homepage make people more sticky? And we're always trying to think about, how can I get rid of the non-experts on our sites? Here's our site for statistics. Again, just a quick glance shows you that if you're a statistician, you're going to be interested. If you're not a hardcore statistician and you're just asking questions about A/B testing, then you'll probably leave. AskVille actually has a math section that's supposed to appeal to mathematicians, and the questions are reasonable. There's write an algorithm to find the number between 7 and 100 divisible by 4. That's a homework. Apply from apartments online. Okay, awesome. That's Zillow, I guess. What does that say? I mean, what is the message there? Spam. And it was asked 13 hours ago, and nobody deleted it yet. So that says nobody cares about this place. There's nobody here. There's no moderators here. No moderator has been here for 13 hours. This is an abandoned place. This is a dusty and scary alley. What is the size of a plot in the Caribbean? That's a good question. 10. Okay, here's my problem. I am 20 years old, didn't really attend high school, and know only super basic math, meaning plus. So that's cute. Again, here's our math site. We have 2 math sites. We have a math site. Do I have a picture? I don't know. I should put Math Overflow on here. We have a math site called Math Overflow for research-level mathematicians. And anybody who is not a graduate student, but like actually a full-time research-level mathematician in a university and uses computers is probably on our Math Overflow site. And they have a rule that if the average math professor would probably be able to answer the question, don't ask it, because that's not a research-level question. We're not looking for stuff that math professors can answer. We're looking for stuff that math professors can't answer. That's the rule for Math Overflow. And because that excludes a lot of useful stuff, we also have this site called mathematics.stackexchange where you're allowed to ask anything that a math professor could answer. But as you can tell, you probably don't even know what the topics are here, even if you took some relatively advanced math. So the level of mathematics that's happening even on this site, which is anything goes, is really, really high compared to what's going on at AskVille with the apartments online and dividing by 4. So once again, everything about our audience is about sort of pushing away the people that don't belong and attracting the people that do belong. This is just a random picture that I have. You're walking down the street, you see these kids. You can tell that you're at Yale University because it looks like Yale. I think the kid is wearing a Bulldog t-shirt, if I'm not mistaken. There's a little Y there. It's winter. You can tell that because there's no leaves on the tree, and this is Connecticut. And they're all wearing shorts, which means they're Californians. So that's a small subset of the students at Yale. And they're playing Ultimate Frisbee, and they're wearing sunglasses and so forth. And they kind of look like jocks based on the way that guy's got his hat. When you walk by this group of people, you either say, that speaks to me, I wish to join this tribe, or I'm not really interested in that. I'm going to the library or the computer lab, in my case. All right, so that's first impressions. Voting is another really important part of our site. You vote on questions. It's sort of the democracy of getting the right answer, sort of out of the peer-to-peer expert knowledge. So you vote on what the really good questions are, but even more importantly, you vote on what the best answers are, and that causes the answers to sort into an order where the best thing is first, and that's actually the key feature of Stack Overflow that causes you to get good answers. Because the first time we launched Stack Overflow, people tried to have discussions, and they tried replying with additional answers that were really questions, right? Because what happens is you say, how do I do X? Well, did you try Y? That's kind of an answer. Then you say, do you have a PC or a Mac? Well, that's really a question about the question. That's not an answer. Then you say, I have the same problem. Can anyone help me? Well, what would happen on Stack Overflow is the first time people tried that, all that stuff would get shuffled, and it wouldn't make any sense, and the conversations would fall apart. And they'd realize, wait a minute, we can't have conversations here. We can only answer questions or ask questions. It's the only thing we can do that the software will let us do. And then there's the voting, of course, on the answers. And what we get is this really nice artifact. You get this awesome feature where you ask a question, and then the next thing you see is the best answer, and you don't see conversation. And you never see somebody saying, I'm having this problem too. Or I used to have this problem, or you wouldn't have this problem if you used a Mac. All that voting leads to reputation. So as your stuff gets voted up, we give you reputation. This is what the U.S. Army calls, it's Colin Powell, this is what the U.S. Army calls fruit salad, which is essentially your reputation. Those are sort of Actually, your reputation is kind of the little stars across the top, and these are your campaign badges, which are like badges that we also have on Stack Exchange to say that you've done something that we want you to do. And every user on the Stack Exchange network has this little blob that tells you who they are, where they're from. Our number one user is John Skeet from Reading. There's not a lot of Californians, believe it or not. That's what's really weird here, actually. There's not a lot of participation from Silicon Valley for reasons we can't explain. Most of the programmers, even though you think of Silicon Valley as being, that's where all the programmers are, there are far more programmers. Programmers are evenly distributed, sort of, more than you would think. So when you first join the site, you get a very, very simple badge as your form of identity. You've got the name that you've chosen for yourself. You earn one reputation for successfully choosing a name for yourself. And then we give you some little random triangles based on your IP address, a hash of your IP address, to use as sort of your identity. So if you haven't chosen a picture of yourself. Over time, you start to earn more reputation. So this guy has already earned 208 points. He's got some little badges. We're keeping track of how often he accepts answers, which is just sort of a way of giving more reputation to the person that solves your problem. And he's changed his little icon there, his gravatar. He's sort of customized how he appears to the rest of the world. When you start to have a lot of reputation, when you get past 10,000, you grow this little drop shadow beneath your picture. And that allows you, when you have that, if somebody moves their mouse over your picture, a little thing pops up which you can completely control and show a biography of yourself. So when you get a certain amount of reputation, you kind of earn this flair, this ability to sort of describe who you are over there. This was our number one. This is still our number one user in terms of total reputation. He's not our fastest growing user right now, but John Skeet, he's an engineer for Google in London, and he had about 400,000 reputation when I wrote this. He was in the audience the last time I gave the speech. I didn't realize he was there. He's like, "Oh yes, that's me." And I said, "Can you tell me when I took this screenshot based on what your reputation is?" He said, "Probably March 31st." And it was a very, very specific. In addition to just sort of earning reputation on the site, you can become a moderator. We have moderator elections, and Stack Exchange Network has 275 elected moderators that came from the community, from the user base, and they earn a little diamond next to their name, which means they have moderator abilities. So you're wearing all this stuff, and it's essentially kind of your flair. And this is just an example I use of somebody that cannot go out the door every morning without picking 6 different ways to demonstrate to the world who he is and what's important to him. So he's got a little Confederate cap there, and he's got a lot of different tattoos, which I can't explain. And not only is he wearing a wife beater, but he's got an emergency backup wife beater down here in case the regular wife beater doesn't work, and a Harley-Davidson bike buckle down there. So there's kind of a lot of information about who he is and who he wants to be friends with and who he wants to not be friends with that he's projecting out there into the world. Oh yeah, and the Shah of Iran, of course, did the same thing. So this is sort of the equivalent of that. We have badges. Badges are sort of interesting because we give you badges for doing stuff that we want you to do, like leaving comments or getting us, participating on our meta site, which is the site about Stack Overflow. Sharing a link to a question that was visited by 200 unique IP addresses. There's all kinds of stuff that you can do on our site. This is only A through E. There's a lot of badges that you can earn. And you can earn each badge multiple times, and you can earn badges in different tags of knowledge. And so there's a lot of badge earning. And the badges are worth precisely 0. However, people still kind of care about them. And what's interesting is that you don't need a lot of people. Everybody says nobody cares about badges. I don't even care about reputation. None of that really matters. Why they can't even imagine somebody that would care about this stuff. And the truth is that a few people care about it, but everybody else at least uses it as a reference for what the community values. So a lot of times you'll see somebody saying, "Is it okay to answer my own question?" And then we'll say, "Well, there's a badge for answering your own question, so this is probably something that this community likes." And in fact, this serves as the canonical list of things that we like you to do. There's some funny stuff in there, like there's a badge for finding an old question that was asked years ago that has never been answered and answering it, even though many years have passed. If you found that question, somebody else might, and if you can tag a question on there, that might benefit someone else. So this sort of serves as a guidepost teaching the world what this community values. And all of that reputation and badge stuff actually translates into what we really are, which is a marketplace for talent. And that's the business behind Stack Overflow. And it's very subtle, and most people don't even notice it. But if you want to hire a great PHP programmer who has some Ruby experience, but maybe they're still a beginner in Ruby in Chicago, then we can find that person, and we can target them, and we can help you hire them. Another thing that happens in every community with more than 3 people is there's some form of government. So Stack Exchange has all kinds of government. It's not just the company decides. In fact, the company usually is told by the community exactly how things are going to work. And at the lowest level, we try to push government onto the people that populate the site. So as you earn more and more reputation, we sort of trust you with the low-level moderation and government of the site. And you start to earn the right to do things like vote to close a question. And if 5 people vote to close a question, it will be closed. And to do that, you need 3,000 reputation. And that just means that we believe that you have enough experience with the site that you can be trusted with these things. And this has worked really, really well. We've tweaked a lot of things here, but this has worked really, really well at making sure that the bulk of the moderation of the site and most of the work keeping the site governed and policed is done by the users themselves and not by us. We have a site called Meta, which is a Stack Overflow about Stack Overflow. It's a site where we talk about what's actually going on the site. What should be the policy about block questions in all caps. Some of these are feature requests that the dev team then looks at and may make changes. So this is kind of a behind the scenes for the real junkies of the site. Whenever you make a community online, you have to make sure to provide some activity for the people that are bored with the first activity that you've given them. So if the first activity is, let's say, answering questions about programming things, if you don't provide any other activity, then when those people get bored, they will disrupt that activity. They'll start to try to find ways that they can hack the community, et cetera. So you always have to have deeper and darker and more amazing things. The example is the kid is in the park and everybody's playing chess, and he plays chess for a while, and then he gets bored with that and says the next game should be throwing chessboards on the ground. And you have to have those more advanced games. So the first more advanced game we have is Meta, where you talk about the site and you help us manage the site. And even deeper, we actually have chat rooms. And very few people go in the chat rooms, maybe 1% of our audience. But they're our most highly engaged users. And these chat rooms are running 24 hours a day. And the moderators are using them to talk about the policy of the site and to make decisions and to deal with attackers sort of on demand. Because when you have this big a site, there's almost permanently somebody trying to blow it up in some way. Like every government, we sort of have our official promulgation of new decrees, which happens on our blog. And we have law. And we have rules. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the rules that we've established, and these have also evolved over time. And once again, just like any society, you're trying to figure out, if you ban really large sugary drinks, what will be the next thing that happens? And so our general rule is we hate fun. This is the logo of We Hate Fun. The thing that we hate the most on Stack Overflow is a really popular question, because that's usually a bad sign. And we've broken this down to 5 different reasons why we close questions, most of which are non-intuitive. Most people think that our rules are crazy, and it takes a while of sort of deep comprehension before you realize why these are the very rules that are making Stack Overflow such a great place to get answers. The first thing you got to remember is, what is Stack Overflow for? The first thing you might guess is, programmer has a question, he gets an answer to that question. So it's for the guy with the question, right? Well, what about the people who are answering the questions? What do they get out of it? Typing practice, I don't know. Actually, one person asks each question. 2 to 4 people answer each question. The average is 2, but there's some things that only get 1 answer, so a lot of questions, I think the median might be 4 answers. 100 to 1,000 people will visit that question over the next few months, coming in from a Google search. And as the question gets older and older, it gets more and more views. So our primary audience is 1,000 people coming in from a Google search. Our primary audience is not the person asking the question. We don't care about that person that much. That person is the grain of sand that is going to become an oyster. All the value accrues, 99% of their value accrues to the people that visit the artifact of the conversation. So we always err in favor of leaving something behind that's useful. And one great example is that we don't like people to type "thank you in advance" at the end of their question. We don't like people to have the conversation. Why? Because the person finding that thing from Google, that's just noise. That's just a 3% probability that they might have to scroll a little bit to see the answer. And so even though the human being asking the question might enjoy typing "thank you," we've given a little upvote button, and that's how you say thanks on our site, not with thank you, because we're optimizing for the people that come along later. And so we have 5 or 6 rules, depending on the site, for why we might close a question. And I'll go through them each in order. They are exact duplicate, off topic, not constructive, not a real question, and too localized. So duplicates are very important because, once again, we're trying to create a canonical source of knowledge. And if you ask a question that has already been asked, rather than have 2 different places on the internet where half the audience is going to each of them, I'd rather have one, because our questions are editable, our answers are editable until the end of time. And so if I can get everybody in one place talking about what is a monad, then we'll get a better and better answer. If I have them in 2 places, I'll sort of have duplicate content that's both half as good. That's pretty easy, so we close duplicates. Toilet issue in my company. This is not strictly a programming problem, but any help will be appreciated. I have a lady employee who is joining from tomorrow, and I want to convey her a message that the bathroom facilities at this office are out of order. How do I tell her to relieve herself before arriving in the morning? Smiley face. Okay, no, that's sort of a not smiley face. Okay, this is off topic. I mean, an awesome question. I'm sure that you can get a lot of answers to you. And the reason for closing things that are off topic, of course, is what I said about what's the first impression. What questions do you see on the home page? I can't have this question showing up on the home page because serious programmers will not hang out here. Okay, this is what we call not constructive. The word not constructive is very strange. Nobody knows what it means. We couldn't think of a better way to describe it. Let's start with a question. Web Forms developer versus MVC developer. Which is more productive, MVC or Web Forms? So that's just a which is better kind of question. Let's get into a religious war over these 2 things. We don't like fact. We like facts. We don't like opinions. Opinions are not very valuable because the conversation sometimes just becomes a back and forth religious war, and it generates a lot of heat, and it generates absolutely no value to people who find it later. It's entertaining for the people who participate. It's just a trap on the internet for anybody who comes along later because it provides absolutely no useful information. So this is the description of this. We expect answers to include facts, references, and specific expertise. This question will likely solicit opinion, debate, arguments, polling, or extended discussion, all things that we hate, because those are all selfish things that benefit the participants and do not create an artifact that's going to be useful to the 100-fold more people that will find this page later. And that's something that people get angry with us because we do this, because these questions, these conversations and debates and heat, they get 100,000 page views. People friggin' love them. They go to the top of Hacker News all the time. You read Hacker News. And then we always have to close them. And then the first comment in Hacker News is, oh, typical, Stack Overflow closed, the best question ever. And we're not here, this is not a popularity contest. This is a compendium of facts about programming. We're not here to make these amazing pages that 1 million people want to visit. That's reddit.com. And it's fun. And I go to Reddit all day long. I really do, trust me. But if we don't want to degrade into, I mean, the thing that people like the most is a cat falling into a toilet. Right? There is no cuter thing. That would be the only page on the internet if we went by popularity. Need ideas about mobile apps, Android, iPhone, which have never been created. I need raw ideas about Android, iPhone apps, which I need. Okay, this is close as not a real question. This is where we say the question is ambiguous, vague, incomplete, rhetorical, cannot reasonably be answered. It might be a conversation starter. Again, it's just not the kind of question that we're trying to get to. We have sort of certain rules about this. For example, if you're asking a question in 1 sentence and you could imagine that the answer would fill a book, that is the wrong question to ask. How should I learn how to program, right? Well, how do you use Ruby? Those are not real questions. We also use not a real question if we think it's just not actually a question that you're actually facing. If you're just making something up. I wrote a question that was how do you move the mouse and logo in order to prove a point that we should allow simple questions on Stack Overflow. This is question number 10 or something. And I wanted to sort of make the point that even very, very simple questions should be allowed, very novice questions. So my question was, how do you move the turtle in logo? And that was open for a long time, and there were very, very good answers. And eventually that was closed as not a real question because I was not actually trying to move the turtle in logo at the time I asked the question. And it's really important to us to only create inventory for problems that people actually face. All right, I am missing a bracket somewhere. This is, we get a lot of these. This is what's called, you can see this would be hard to find. This is what we call too localized. We call this too localized, and that's because Jeff Atwood never translated any software in his life and didn't know the word localized meant something else. But too localized meaning this really only applies to one person once. Again, we're trying to create artifacts for the whole internet. This is a waste of a page. Go solve it yourself. The way we tell people to answer, if you have this problem, you can say, I have this code, and I know I'm missing a bracket. Are there any tools that I can use to find missing brackets? Other than scanning it and that's a great question, right? And you'll get answers. On the other hand, I'm missing a bracket. This is kind of useless. We get the other canonical question, and you see these all over the place on Yahoo Answers. Why and Quora? Why is there a green Honda parked on my street? What? I don't know. Is it still there? Go check, because maybe tomorrow it won't be there. Can't possibly answer. So anyway. To summarize, Stack Overflow is a huge, huge community. Stack Exchange itself is a city. This is Seoul, South Korea, which has got a population of about 20 million. So we're bigger than Seoul. And everybody in Seoul speaks Korean really well, except me when I was there. And yet you can tell that there's sort of low rises and high rises. There's many different cultures. There's rich people. There's poor people. There's every possible different kind of activity going on here. And there's a lot of things in common, and they're all sort of living together. And that's what the Stack Exchange network is like. And when you try to imagine what would it take to comprehend Seoul, South Korea, that's what it would take to comprehend the entire Stack Exchange network. So we've sort of moved from this world, to kind of reiterate my point, we've moved to this world of computation, and we've gotten to this world of millions of people just communicating with computers, and they're creating societies that happen to be online, or they're sort of extending their cultures online, and the right tools for that, I think, are anthropology. Thank you very much. So I have 10 more minutes or so for questions, if anybody has any questions you want to ask. I haven't actually looked at percentage of questions rejected over time. On Stack Overflow per se, the absolute number of questions goes up every day. So we're not close to running out of questions. We're now getting something like 7,000 new questions a day. And believe me, not all of them are gems. And as soon as Stack Overflow became super successful, we saw this phenomenon of people that don't actually know how to be programmers and have nevertheless somehow gotten a job as a programmer, literally typing their assignment into Stack Overflow and hoping for some kind of result. And the quality of the questions, there's been something of a plummeting of the quality of the questions. But the technology is changing all the time, and so no, we're not running out of questions, really. Sometimes people say, well, the question is a little bit like, Stack Overflow is really popular, nobody goes there anymore, it's too crowded. It's that kind of thing. It's actually, almost every metric we look at is going in the right direction. We have more questions, we get a higher percentage of answers on most of our sites. Stack Overflow has been holding steady at 80% of questions answered for a really long time. We started measuring things like the friendliness of the answers, and that's actually going up. Even though it starts to feel like sort of an unfriendly place when we're closing all kinds of stuff that doesn't belong. So that's probably the worst thing that we are at doing. And we're going to work on that by trying to use machine learning to identify dupes, but we're not very good at that. One reason we're not very good at that is that for many people it's easier to answer a question than to find what it's a duplicate of and point to that. And it's more fun. And they'll earn some reputation, so they keep doing that. So we wind up with dupes. But the dupes that we wind up with are usually on the easier questions. If there's a question that is somewhat canonical, they will often merge them. It's sort of a constant arms race, essentially, as people try to figure out new ways to game it. And then we figure out what they've done, and then we build tools to block what they're doing. The truth is, there's sort of this, occasionally people will do things in order to earn a reputation, like answer a question and then link to it from Twitter, or answer a question that they wrote themselves, or whatever, and they'll get reputation for that, and people will say, you're a reputation whore, or you're just trying to get reputation. And actually, they're doing things that we designed the system to cause them to do. And we actually like them to do those things, and that's why we give them reputation when they do them. So right now, and actually for the last few years, I feel like we're mostly at the point where we're really, really happy with the reputation system. It's really, really hard to game it. There were a few things, the kind of games that people were playing were sometimes more subtle, like get into a fight with somebody and then go find every question they ever answered and downvote it to steal reputation from them. And we even detect that and we cure it, and it doesn't stick. It's almost completely automated now. So we've had plenty of people on the site who have tested all the boundary conditions, and we've fixed almost all of them. There's 90 of them right now. About half of those are in beta. Half of those are officially launched. And they're on all kinds of subjects, mostly geeky subjects. So, WordPress, Drupal, database administration, electrical engineering, Raspberry Pi, tech and LaTeX, Bitcoin, and then some not so geeky stuff like science fiction and fantasy, photography. We get right there into the totally liberal arts. And we at first, our original idea was we'll just start creating a bunch of sites and hope that people come. We discovered very quickly that we need 200 active participants in a site for it to have a liquid market where almost every question gets an answer. And you could imagine sites that are on a slightly larger domain where you need a larger number than 200. And so we attempt to convince ourselves that we have an audience of 200 people before we open a site. So what we did is we created a website called Area 51, and you can go to that website and say, I am interested in a Stack Exchange about frogs, pet frogs. And we'll create that proposal, and there'll be a little bit of discussion first defining exactly what's going to be allowed on the website about pet frogs, whether it includes frogs that you eat or only frogs as pets.
Internal discussion, like inside the company?
No, external to the world. It's the public. It's our community. It's right. And as you reach certain milestones of getting people to talk about that, we'll actually start promoting that conversation on the network. So you'll go onto Stack Overflow and you'll see a little ad saying, interested in frogs? Click here to help us make a site about frogs. And so we'll start to try to gather 200 people. And what we're actually looking for is 200 people who already use Stack Exchange on a regular basis. A lot of times somebody will go and call the Frog Society and say, hey, put this link in your membership newsletter and get everybody to click on this so that Stack Exchange makes a site about frogs. And those people come in and we don't recognize them from the Stack Exchange network, so they only have historically a 20% chance of showing up for the site. And so we count their votes as 1/5. So once we've gathered 200 real people, or 1,000 fake people, we open the site. And then we email all the people that have told us that they're interested in the site. And that usually gets us critical mass on day one. And the site then goes through sort of various beta phases to try to prove that it's going to have legs, it's really going to survive. We've created a few sites that didn't really work out. There was a site on atheism, and they talked a lot for the first day, and then they ran out of questions. There was really nothing to talk about there, I guess. It's just like... Good question. We started out very, very virtual. So the first 3 developers were Jeff Atwood, who was in Berkeley, a guy in North Carolina, and somebody in Oregon. And the 3 of them built the site, just sort of collaborating over the internet. When I was, I guess I was the first person in New York, which is now our headquarters, as sort of a CEO. And we, a lot of the development team and the community team are people from the network, actually. So almost all of our programmers on the core team that work on the main engine are people that had a lot of reputation on the site, and they came to our attention, and we asked them if they wanted to get involved, and they very often say yes. And so we brought them on full time. A lot of times those people, I don't want to generalize too much, but a lot of times you have somebody in kind of a third-tier market for programmers, like a place where they want to live. Mark Gravel is a good example. He lives in Forest of Dean, England, which is, I don't know, Middle Earth somewhere. And he's clearly one of the most brilliant programmers in the entire known universe. He was our number 2 user on the entire site. And he just had family reasons why he could not leave Forest of Dean, England. And this is a vastly better programming job than he's ever going to get. And that's the reason he was so active on Stack Overflow in the first place, was that he was deeply under-challenged in his day job. And so the people that are very active on Stack Overflow are actually great people to recruit, because the reason they're participating so heavily on Stack Overflow is because they love programming, love everything about it. They may be experts at it, or they may be learners, but they're just obsessed about it, and they love it, and that's why they have so many points. And those are great people to hire. And when you hire them, usually they stop working on Stack Overflow, which is sad for us, but somebody will replace them. In terms of the company culture, so there's a lot of telecommuting and a lot of remote people. We've also built another dev team in New York, which handles all the revenue stuff on the career side. We have 3 sales teams in London, New York, and Denver that sell job listings to recruiters and hiring people. We have an evangelism team, which is mostly based in New York. And I think we have, Alex, how many people do we have in New York today? 47 in New York, 75.
45, we're here
40, yeah. And 70 total in the company right now, and we're hiring a lot of programmers and salespeople. The reputation number itself and the number of badges that somebody has tends to mostly just tell you how active they are on the site and how much time they spend on it, not necessarily how smart they are. Within reason. Like, it's impossible to earn a lot of reputation if you're not a good programmer. But the difference, there are a lot of amazing programmers that might only have 300 reputation on the site because they haven't participated very much. They answered a couple of questions and then they just weren't that interested. For a recruiting perspective, the most useful thing to do is to actually read the answers that somebody is writing. So if I'm a hiring manager as a programmer and you gave me somebody's Stack Overflow profile, first thing I would do is read their top 3 highest voted answers. And that would give me so much more knowledge about whether they're a good programmer or not. I don't care about if they have 300 reputation or 1,000. I just want to be able to read 3 answers. And you'll instantly have 5 times more information than you can get from their resume. No, we actually deliberately don't. We sort of do within buckets. But once somebody has, I don't really know what it is, but we actually very deliberately have not given recruiters a sort by reputation feature because we didn't want John Skeet, who is very happy at Google in London, getting every single job offer. And it doesn't make sense. And literally, as soon as you see somebody who's written 5 answers on the site, this is a person that you can. They may not be good, they may be bad, but you're going to know from reading those answers. Even if you're not a programmer, you're going to know this is a guy who knows his stuff. I think they do unless you deliberately do something to prevent it, unless you create some kind of culture that says this will not get dumbed down. I think that was happening to Wikipedia, and there's an article about every Smurf, and then they said, no, we got to put an end to this. This is not going to work this particular way. It's not going to make an encyclopedia. This is just going to be pages on the internet that anybody can type things on, and that wasn't the idea of Wikipedia. The idea of Wikipedia is some authority, a little bit, and some quality, which can only come from limiting yourself very strictly. And I think Wikipedia right now is pissing off a ton of people by going through and trying to raise their standards throughout Wikipedia of what's allowed to be included. And I think they have to do that, but they are pissing off a ton of people. So if you look at the number of contributors to Wikipedia, that's been going down every year for the last few years. And the number of contributors to English Wikipedia is probably already lower than the number of contributors on Stack Exchange. I don't know if this is a bad thing for Wikipedia because Wikipedia is full, but let me give you the Wikipedia story in a nutshell. If you go look up Joel Spolsky on Wikipedia right now and click on Talk to see the talk page, you'll see a furious debate as to whether I am important enough to be included on Wikipedia. And fortunately, I just made it. So they have all these sort of rules about notoriety, and it turns out I've written 4 books, so that helps. That gave me some credibility. But why, like all the other things I've done, why do those not give me a reason to be on there? The thing that they seem to care about most on Wikipedia is like, are there people writing about Joel Spolsky in some kind of credible source? If the New York Times had done a profile of me, that would count because there would be some fact-checked thing that they could include facts on. Now, why would it hurt to have an article about this bench on Wikipedia? And we could talk about where it was, and you guys could, every time you moved it, you could sort of update that Wikipedia page. And there's one more fact about the world that Wikipedia has. The reason that would hurt is not that the bench is not important, and not that we're running out of pages on the internet, or there's taking up bits that could be used for something better. The reason that would hurt is that nobody could ever fact check that article. And somebody could say, this bench levitates at night, and nobody could prove you wrong. And so now all of a sudden there's bad facts getting into Wikipedia because you have to have a standard on Wikipedia that there is some form of fact-checking possible, not even done. Like, we don't even have to do it. It just has to be possible to fact-check. And so you can't have articles on Wikipedia about people for whom you can't fact-check knowledge about those people. And this is very non-intuitive, and I try to I explain this to people, and they say, "Okay, I get it. I see why Wikipedia is doing that." And in the meantime, they get very angry and write terrible editorials about how all this stuff is being taken down by the deletionists at Wikipedia. So I don't think Wikipedia had any choice. If they wanted to maintain the quality, they had to get hardcore. They had a logical reason for doing it. They did it, and that's the only thing that's going to save Wikipedia in the long run. But in the short term, it's going to piss off a lot of people who say, what the hell is going on here? We have the exact same thing going on in Stack Overflow, where we just know that if you ask, should I use ASP.NET or Java or whatever it is, that conversation is going to be an awful waste of time on the internet. For very similar reasons that the article about this chair, this stool, is a waste of time on Wikipedia. That particular thing is not a thing that we want on our site. So it becomes popular, everybody participates, we close it down, they're in the middle of a heated debate and they can no longer participate in it, and they feel like they're smacked in the face. They're like, you're interfering with my natural God-given right to type onto any web page in the internet and have the words stay there forever. Which is one of the new Bill of Rights things that you can, if there's an edit box, just go ahead, type in there, it's for you. That's what it's for. It's the so-called the YouTube addendum to the Bill of Rights. Not very much. We have let's see, I think we have right now 3,000 questions on, 3 million questions on Stack Overflow. Yeah, and probably like 6 or 7 million answers. And I think John Skeet has written like 8,000 of them. He's the #1 user. So there is an unbelievable long-tailedness, or fat-tailedness to the answering of the questions. There's a lot of distribution. One thing that I've noticed about human nature is that if people see a question that they very coincidentally know the answer to, and they feel like, wow, this is a huge coincidence, I'm the only person that's going to be able to answer this, they will feel a very, very strong compulsion to answer it. I remember I was walking around our summer beach house once, and I'm walking the dog in our neighborhood, and I don't know anybody in this neighborhood. I literally never, ever socialize with any of our neighbors. And sorry, we just hang out by the pool. So I'm walking the dog, and somebody pulls up on a Mercedes next to me and says, do you know where Susan Steiger lives? And actually, I did. And so I said, 1154 Town Line, right there, over there on the right, turn left, that's her. And I was so pleased with myself because I don't know any of the neighbors, but I happen to know Susan Steiger because we rented her house one summer. And I realized, this is the only neighbor I know. And there was something about the coincidence of the beauty of that question that made me feel so pleased with myself that I could answer it. That I'm still talking about it today, 3 years later. And that's sort of the magic of that very long tail, the fat long tail of people answering, the people that you see on Stack Overflow answering 2 questions about something they worked on when they were at Microsoft 10 years ago. That's really where some of the beauty of Stack Overflow starts to appear. All right? Thank you.